And today we are delighted to welcome Mr. Berry Vrbanovic, President of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. As President of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, Councillor Berry Vrbanovic represents approximately 2,000 municipalities across Canada that together serve over 90% of all Canadians. With over 25 years of experience in both the public and private sector, Berry has a long history of professional municipal experience in elected community leadership. Initially joining the City of Kitchener as a staff person in 1986, Berry was first elected in 1994 and since then has worked impressively not only for his constituents but also for the residents of Kitchener, but also for the broader local government movement, both nationally and internationally. Berry has served on the boards of numerous community and national organizations and has held numerous positions at the FCM. And outside of his municipal responsibilities, Berry has had a varied career ranging in owning small businesses to being the executive director of a national organization. So, without further ado, it is my pleasure to turn the podium over to Mr. Berry Vrbanovic.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction, Natasha, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to begin by asking all of you one question. Where would Canada be without strong cities and strong communities? Would we have the same quality of life? Could we compete globally? What would the future hold for future generations of young Canadians? While we may have differing opinions on a variety of issues in this country, surely, most Canadians would agree on the importance of cities and communities in their day-to-day quality of life. However, what we struggle with is taking the concrete steps to ensure that the same cities and communities remain strong, vibrant building blocks of our country. In the meantime, countries globally are looking to the future, now by implementing long-term prosperity programs built around strong, resilient, innovative cities and communities. Friends, Canada needs to do the same. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Je suis très heureux d'être parmi vous à ce déjeuner de l'Économique Club du Canada. While I have the privilege to be here today representing the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, or FCM, I do so knowing that I have thousands of municipal mayors and councillors standing not only with me in spirit, but a few have even been able to join me here today. And so I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge them now. As I said in a tweet last weekend, one of the nation's hardest working mayors and mayor of our nation's capital and your city, Mayor Jim Watson, thank you for joining us today. Mayor Watson is accompanied by two of his councillors, Councillor Mary Ann Wilkinson, a former mayor, and Councillor Tim Tierney, both of whom have served on FCM committees and the board. They're joined by several federal counterparts who are friends of municipal government as well. From the government side, Ms. Candace Hepner, Parliamentary Secretary for Public Safety. From the official opposition, Ms. Olivia Chow, Critic for Transportation and Infrastructure, and a former municipal councillor herself. And Ms. Chow is joined by her colleagues Mike Sullivan and Peter Stauffer. And from the party that first introduced the gas tax when they were in government, a former member of the committee that looked at the New Deal, Mr. Maurice Bélanger. I take the time to introduce these elected officials because they, together with the women and men in public service in all three orders of government, work tirelessly on behalf of Canadians to help build strong cities and communities across our great country. Please join me in thanking all of them for all they do and for their attendance here this afternoon. Let me also thank all of you, our other valued business and community leaders, for joining us as we want to learn more about why cities and communities matter. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities has been the national voice of municipal government since 1901. Today, FCM represents over 90% of the Canadian population, about 2,000 municipalities across the country, including all of our biggest cities and hundreds of small towns, rural and northern communities from coast to coast to coast. Je suis ici pour vous parler des villes et des collectivités canadiennes. de leur situation actuelle, de leurs projets et de leur importance pour le Canada. Je profiterai de cette tribune pour dévoiler le plus récent rapport de la Fédération canadienne des municipalités, la FCM, intitulé justement « L'état des villes et des collectivités du Canada en 2012 ». Vous serez donc les premières au courant des plus récentes données et analyses du secteur municipal, un secteur clé pour la prospérité soutenue du Canada. In joining you at today's Economic Club of Canada luncheon, I hope to share with you the state of Canada's cities and communities as outlined in our first annual report, where our communities are at, where they're headed, and what our communities mean to Canada. Then, to wrap up, I'd like to discuss what needs to happen to ensure our cities and communities continue to be the strong engines that are necessary for Canada's growth and prosperity. So, why am I talking about this subject today? 2 words: communities matter. From our largest cities to our most remote villages, communities matter for our economy, for our families, and for our future. Like never before, Canada needs strong cities and communities to compete in the global race for jobs, talent, and investment. FCM often talks about strong cities and communities, but what does this mean? Well, it means communities that address the needs of people and businesses. It means places where families know their streets and neighborhoods are safe. It means businesses have quality roads and bridges to deliver goods and services. And it means having access to fast, efficient public transit to connect them to jobs. And it means there is affordable housing and a high quality of life, from libraries and parks to hockey rinks and a vibrant cultural scene, so that employers can attract and retain skilled workers. But despite their importance, Canada's cities and communities have spent most of the past 25 years in a state of decline. The results are all around us: traffic gridlock, crumbling roads and bridges, rising public safety costs, a high-priced housing market that pushes families deeper into debt and too often some out onto the street, and rural and remote communities that are struggling to give their young people a future to look forward to. The largest single problem to come out of this decline is the national municipal infrastructure deficit, pegged in 2007 at $123 billion. We see this deficit every day in cracked sidewalks, in gaping potholes, and in rusting bridges. Our aging water systems necessitate dozens of boil water advisories, and our deteriorating highway overpasses drop concrete slabs with potentially tragic consequences for the drivers below. It wasn't always like this. From 1955 to 1977, new investment in infrastructure rose by 4.8% annually, a period of intense construction activity that closely matched Canada's population growth. But following this boom, repairs and new projects were put off. The infrastructure deficit then grew over several decades, coming to a head in the 1990s, when federal and provincial governments fought their deficits by offloading responsibilities to municipalities. Mais le déficit et les autres problèmes que j'ai mentionnés ne sont que les symptômes d'un mal plus profond. Un facteur fondamental et à la base de tous ces enjeux, notre régime fiscal, un régime déficient qui prend beaucoup plus de collectivités qu'il n'y réinvestit. Comment puis-je l'affirmer? Par exemple, pour chaque dollar de taxes et d'impôts payés par les Canadiens, le gouvernement fédéral reçoit 50 cents et les gouvernements provinciaux et territoriaux reçoivent 42%. Faites le calcul, il ne reste que 8 cents pour les gouvernements locaux. It is clear that a tax system that leaves local governments with just 8 cents of every tax dollar collected, when provincial and territorial governments receive 42 cents and the federal government receives 50 cents, is part of the problem. But if you're still not convinced, here's another statistic that puts this imbalance in perspective. Out of every additional tax dollar Canadians paid over the past 50 years, only 5 cents went to local governments. This means cities and communities have received almost no share of new tax revenue from economic growth for half a century. Why is this? Well, I'm not an economist, but it's clear that federal and provincial treasuries consume the vast majority of income and sales tax revenues generated by economic growth. In turn, this leaves municipalities to rely on slow-rising property taxes, a regressive tax that hits middle and low Canadians hardest, including working families, senior citizens, and small business owners. The result? Local governments are left with inadequate means to address our growing responsibilities, including many downloaded by the other orders of government. Without revenues that grow with the economy, and without sufficient long-term investments by other governments, municipalities will continue to struggle meeting their growing responsibilities with limited resources. There are some glimmers of hope, however. In recent years, the Government of Canada has recognized that many of the growing municipal problems around infrastructure, housing, and transportation are national in scope because they span all regions of our country. They can also see that these problems are not just making day-to-day life harder for local residents, they are undermining the foundations that Canada and its economy are built on. This realization has resulted in federal action. Budget 2004 gave municipal governments a GST refund, and Budget 2005 brought us a share of the federal gas tax, a new kind of long-term infrastructure funding tool that delivers predictable annual income that municipalities can plan and budget for. The change of government in 2006 brought the Building Canada Fund, a 7-year commitment to fund municipal infrastructure projects, and the 2008 budget made the gas tax transfer permanent. These investments strengthened our economic foundations and helped make our communities better places to live and work. Then came the 2008 meltdown and the global recession. Around the world and in Canada, governments turned to stimulus spending to create jobs. Under the Economic Action Plan, federal, municipal, provincial, and territorial governments worked together to create jobs. By the end of 2011, municipalities had helped to pay for and build $10 billion in projects, creating some 100,000 jobs across this country. The result? Canada staved off the worst effects of the recession and emerged from this downturn as one of the strongest economies in the world. More importantly than that, however, the Economic Action Plan showed that when governments come together, ready to do their part and find common sense solutions, collectively we can provide better value for Canadians.